Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're talking today about food and beverage, and what it is to live healthily by choosing the right food, the right beverage, and so on. And this has been one of the very big trends that we at Fireside have seen in India over the last few years, how people are making choices in a way that we're not seen in the food and beverage industry in the last many decades. And so we wanted to explore this whole topic of living a more healthy life by choosing what you eat, what you drink. And to join me today on that, I have three panelists. I'm going to ask them a little later to talk about their businesses. So, a very, very snappy one line intro. So, I have Shrey Badhani, who is the co founder of Kapiva, a business in the area of Ayurvedic foods. I have Avnish, who is the founder of Wellbeing Nutrition, making interesting, easy to consume supplements, and Shauravi, co founder of Slurrp Farm, all about millets and how that makes for a more interesting set of foods for you to eat while also being healthy. So, guys, I just want to explore first something about your businesses. Let me start with you, Shauravi. Let me ask you uh, what's unique about your business? What's a problem you're solving for consumers, and why is this so different to what a lot of other startups are doing?
Sure. So Meghna and I co-founded Slurp Farm, and that really sprung out of the sense that food for children hadn't changed since we were kids, maybe even our parents were children. So the sort of impetus behind Slurp Farm was to say, let's go create this children's food aisle and shelf. And I say this really often, there is a pet food aisle in most of the modern retail formats. There is no children's food aisle. So it was really to capture that, innovate, bring exciting new products, because when both of us lived in London, everybody would keep asking us to bring products for their children back home, which we thought was a little odd. So that was the founding part of it. And I think as we started getting into it, we discovered millets. And millets have always been a big part of both Meghna and my family way of eating. And then we realized that it wasn't there on the shelf, So her party's recipe or my Ajji's recipe saw no representation in the mainstream. And as we understood the micronutrient properties of millets, understood how good they are for children to start eating young, but indeed for adults in terms of being good for diabetes, good for keeping your GI levels low, good for people who want to try to lose weight. I think we really went deeper into the world of millets. And I think that's what makes Slurp Farm unique and makes a lot of our product innovation unique is we try to bring back grandma's wisdom. So, in this world of tech, we're always trying to be grandma tech. And that is really bring back real food to the plate as you start to eat, set the foundations right. And that's really where we want to be different from what is happening on the rest of the shelf, where the problem is really malnutrition on both ends, people who are well off and people who are poor, and address that head on.
And Shauravi, taste is such a big part of eating. We
Yeah.
can keep talking about healthy eating, but till you get the taste right, it's going to be very poor adoption. How do you tackle that with millets?
We don't make any product that doesn't taste good, because my kitchen is full of products that are very healthy. I've brought them and my kids don't eat them. And then either I have to eat them or they sit on the shelf for another 2 years, right? We've all been through that. So taste wins over anything, 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 any day of the week. But if you deconstruct that, we have this sense that anything on a shelf has to be not like either has to be healthy or has to be tasty and junky, and they exist in two different worlds. But that's not true. And when you eat at home or when you're cooking at home, your food is both healthy and tasty, and you can bring that to the retail shelf. And so we work hard. We work hard to keep it real, but we know that if you don't taste good, it's not going to work. you cannot make it insipid and bland and boring. And I think that what we have done over time is use millets in different recipes, but yet kept it real. So you're right in asking the question, because sometimes texture or too much ragi can be overpowering, right? We've all had that. You have to be used to eating it. But I'd say that we'd happily submit to a taste challenge, and I think we'd come out well on that score.
I really like that. Keep it real and really tasty. So that's wonderful to hear that. Over to you, Avnish. You're in the business of supplements. Again, could you tell us about why that's relevant for India and what are you doing which is different?
Sure. I think what started off in 2016 as a personal attributional journey when I was an athlete, I realized that I couldn't find products on shelves that really met my nutritional needs. Everything wasn't innovated. We were going through the same pill fatigue. We normally looked at nutrition as an afterthought when there was an ailment, right? We always constructed our mindset to think, if I fall sick, I medicate. And then I'll stick to this medication for as long as if we need pies to. And I think that narration has kind of transformed where everyone's looking at wellness in a more holistic way. I feed my body with the right tea in the morning, or maybe a coffee which is fortified, to me drinking green tea in the night, to having so many supplements. Subliminally, we know that we're consciously looking at wellness in a larger factor, but we never really went back and looked at innovation. When you look at the large pharma companies over the last 50 years, no one's innovated. It's the same capsule, it's the same tablet, it's the same form of a syrup. And after a point of consumption, you realize that this doesn't keep up to my need, right? My need is so on the go. My need is so different compared to the next person right next to me. And those demands kind of fueled that desire to create a very different way of consumption. We said, if I had to change the narrative in making nutrition more friendly, easy, look at like an FMCG company, right? How do I ensure that my supplements taste good? They feel right and they don't feel like medicine. How do I change that narrative? And that's when we went back to technology and said, is there enough tech available worldwide where we can make nutrition less supplementy and more kind of lifestyle oriented? And that's what started the premise, right? We started with FOSN because we realized that the technology was more bioavailable. Most of us are on the go. We sit in office, but we don't want to have a sugary drink. We want to eat healthy, we want to live right. And could we deliver the right kind of nutrition delivered from plants? So what we call nurtured by nature. Can we get the same kind of nutrition that most of our green juices, which are very cumbersome to make at home, delivered to you when you need it? And that's what started the premise with Daily Greens, with all the products that we built, right? And as Shauravi said, for us, taste is everything. We're a lifestyle beverage company. We don't call ourselves nutrition to that large extent. Yes, we deliver nutrition, but in formats which are more lifestyle oriented. And that's what kind of fueled our desire to look at different technologies worldwide, innovate in formats that can deliver the same precise targeted nutrition without breaking the bank, without going to your doctor. And that's really the foundation of well-being for us.
A quick follow-on there, Avnish. India isn't a country where people generally consume a lot of supplements. Unlike, let's say, the US, where every morning starts with a handful of vitamin pills and so on.
Sure.
How do you build this culture of supplementing? How do you convince Indians to take on all the wonderful supplements that you're putting out there in the market?
So I think what's changed really, Kannan, is there's ample amount of research and awareness that's made available, right? The pandemic has created this mind shift where awareness has peaked towards the consumption of nutrition, right? While there might be this inertia at some point where consumers are more focused on what they do daily versus looking at new products, this is where innovation becomes very tricky for us as well. When you build new categories, how do you educate the consumer that most of their old habits weren't really reliant on what they were supposed to deliver, right? And the bigger challenge always is, supplementation is a more conscious builder. Why do you take supplements? Is your conscious awareness to go out and say that I intend and I choose to live a healthier life and I'll choose right. When that choose right happens, the first thing you do is go online, you research, you Google it and say what's best for my hair or what's best for my gut. And that's when there's a lot of education that's now come about where consumers themselves have become so much more alert, so much more aware, but the solutions haven't been put in place, right? while the awareness is on a separate trajectory, we don't look at solutions being fed in that same format, right? Looking at, when you look at native advertising, you look at any forms of marketing, we never look at a problem and then the solution. We look at problems at a larger scale. And I think that awareness with doctors, with everyone talking about vitamin C and zinc through the pandemic, nutrition's become a self form of medication. In some way, every customer is going out and saying, yes, I choose to and I want to eat healthy. I just need to find a format that fits my lifestyle. So I think the narrative is really transformed in India as well. You look at the data that's coming from tier 1 and tier 2 on immunity boosters, for example. The amount of search is far higher than most of the searches that we would look for politicians and most of your political rallies. And that's really transformed in the way consumers take that first chance and saying, I choose a healthier lifestyle. I now need to find products that fit me. And so I think the education is there, and it's obviously building year on year. How our products fit in is a matter of how we educate them. How do we make it not a pill fatigue? How do I make sure that it's not a tablet? It's not something that you need to be prescribed, but it kind of fits into your lifestyle. We desire to drink a green juice. Can I make that simpler for you? That's our goal.
Very, very interesting that you're saying that the mindset has shifted, and it's up to startups like you to create product formats which help people choose a healthier lifestyle.
And also build formats that are more intuitive, right? For us is if I had to go out and consciously go out and make a smoothie bowl versus finding an alternative that gives me the same value proposition at home right now when I need it, that's the alternative, right? We know the problem exists. We know there's a solution out there, but can I make it convenient and intuitive for my customer?
Cool. Shrey, over to you. You're using Ayurveda in a big way, and Ayurveda is very old, 5,000 years old. What's new about what you're doing?
Sure. So kind of first of all, just a little bit about Kapiva, right? So our name Kapiva actually comes from the 3 doshas or body types within Ayurveda, Kapha, Pitta, and Vata. And what we're really trying to do is our consumer is the Indian millennial, and we are trying to combine Ayurveda in their nutrition to help them lead a healthier life. As a brand, I would say a lot of what we're trying to do comes from 2-3 big observations about our consumers. I think observation 1 is that the health and diet of most Indian millennials, so folks in their late 20s, early 30s, is getting a little bit more challenging. Our cities are tough to live in, pollution's high, commutes are long. So health, wellness, nutrition are things that Indian millennials are increasingly concerned about. Observation 2 that we have is that Ayurveda in folks' diet can be a huge driver of better health outcomes along a whole range of major problems that we all face, right? Things like weight management, immunity, digestion. Adding some of those traditional Ayurvedic ingredients in our food is something that over many, many years, 50, 60, 70 years, our grandmothers have done. So what Shauravi was talking about as well, right? It's part of our kind of food tradition, but somewhere it's been lost. And I think a lot of millennials are very curious about sort of going back to that tradition. So our job really is to take this kind of interest, this latent interest in Ayurveda nutrition, combine it with some of these very real, pressing, emerging health concerns that our consumers, the millennials, face, and make a brand that is really relevant, that's approachable, and that is talking about the concerns that Indian millennials face around their health and talking to them in a manner and in places which feels relatable. So I'd say that's broadly what we're trying to do. Yeah.
And tell me, I know that immunity has been a big one over the last 15 months or so.
Yeah.
Are you seeing other areas where people are looking for Ayurvedic solutions, ingestible Ayurvedic solutions?
Yeah. So I'd say at the highest level, there's literally every health concern folks are curious, right? And I think, again, it comes from our Indian tradition of our mothers and grandmothers telling us, hey, why don't you eat a little bit of this if you have a bad stomach or something else? But I'd say the big ones which we've seen quite a lot of traction in is around using Ayurveda for better hair and skin. So really beauty, where beauty comes from within, through the food that we eat rather than, through something that we apply necessarily. And again, there it kind of intuitively makes sense, right? I think when we look at our previous generations, when we look at even people in our lives, I think good health that comes from within really radiates outwards. So that's an area of sort of increasing interest and sort of traction with our consumers. I think digestion and gut health, again, is a place where Ayurveda has a ton to offer, very, very relevant solutions, and folks are super, super interested. So I'd say the interesting thing for us now, because we've now been doing this for almost 5 years, first 2 years, slightly different format, last 3 years, more FMCG, is just the organic levels of interest, curiosity amongst millennials has increased. And I think a lot of that comes as this whole cohort of people who are super aware, super digitally savvy, are exploring these themes of their own sort of accord often.
Interesting. So what I hear you say is that you're looking at how to make Ayurveda relevant for today's health and wellness concerns,
Yes,
and there is a whole lot of relevance that millennials are seeing Ayurveda playing a role in their life.
very much so. Yes.
Cool. Thank you for that insight, all three of you, into your businesses. To a next level of sort of understanding of what's happening in the world of foods. One of the things that I've observed over the last few years is that while D2C is very hot, uh, food startups have tended to focus more on e-commerce and offline. And that's significantly because that calls for less investments. Whereas D2C, it seems to consume money for a long, long time. Now, I know that you guys think differently. Why do you think differently? What's the role of D2C? Why do you think it's worth putting money into it for, I don't know how many years before it starts paying off? Shauravi, Shrey, Avnish, who would like to take this on?
I can address some of that. I think that D2C and going digital, right, has allowed us to reach out to our customer and know them to the degree of exactly whom, in a way that an ad campaign that costs exactly that much just would never do. So the way we think of D2C in some way is that if over the course of, say, 3 years, I'm going to spend X on my D2C, that is actually, and that enables me to build my brand. That is something a larger brand will spend in 1 minute TV advert on prime time, right? So what you are actually seeing is younger, newer, incumbent, disruptor, challenger, whatever word you want to use, brands being able to create the ability that they actually exist. Because otherwise we would get crowded out. There's no place on the shelf. It's very hard to have distribution across the entire country on day one. So although it is not necessarily a profitable channel on day one, you have to make sure your unit economics work at the end of the day. If you shut off that tap, will you still make money? Yes. Then, and does the consumer want your product? So it doesn't allow you to hop, skip, and jump over product market fit and unit economics as a theory and a concept which continue to hold. But I think what it enables you to do is skip the large offline investment on day one, and it costs a lot of money to build a offline brand. And I think more than anything, it allows you to speak to your consumer. The insight that we get, the way we're able to switch a product, understand what the person wants next, right? Only digital allows you that. And by that, literally between an Instagram account and our customer service and what our CRM tells us, you can get and crowdsource what all these data surveys don't tell you. So definitely a channel worth investing.
Interestingly, Shauravi, about a year back, your business is almost entirely offline.
Yes.
And you just did a big pivot, isn't it? How did
Yes.
that work for you?
So, I guess it's not correct to say it was entirely offline. We were always half offline and half online, but online in marketplace. And we didn't launch our own D2C website because inherently, and this is a question I think whether we can all debate, right? We feel in the long run, you have to belong in that person's shopping basket. So for food, it's not the case for shoes or fashion, right? But even as a mom, I like going to the store. That's one thing. But if I order my food, I don't really want like my kids' food coming different ghanti. Somebody's coming to deliver one pack. Like I just want it to be part of my grocery shop. And you've really arrived when you're part of that weekly grocery shop and the mom doesn't forget you. So you have to make that journey to being in the weekly grocery shop. So I would say our journey started very much with the Amazon and Big Basket explosion. And they were always a part of our startup phase. And I think what COVID did, and it happened a bit before COVID, about 6 months before COVID, we launched our D2C website. But COVID actually has given Indian consumers the comfort, right? Okay, like all websites look the same. Now Shopify has also made that possible where your hamburger interface seems familiar. It's not the same, but it's leading you to that Amazon-like experience where every website kind of does the same thing. And so once you get familiar and you're like, okay, that's it. I got to my cart, I added, and Paytm or all the other ways of pay, the checkout is faster. Then the consumer friction to ordering through a website has gone, and the infrastructure has come to support it. And definitely the pivot was, I would say we thought about it, but it was so natural, the transition, that it's been easy. It's been easy, and it has enabled us to speak to our customer even better.
And Shrey, do you agree with that?
Yeah, so I broadly agree with a bunch of elements in there. So I think the way we think of D2C, right, is it's a tool to really get closer to the consumer. So the sales channel element of having that kind of direct consumer connect is super helpful. But I think some of the other elements that Shauravi spoke of, right, I think this ability to get quicker, completely direct consumer feedback is super important, in terms of product development. I think talking to the consumer, the ability to build the brand with the consumer, having that direct voice of communication with the consumer is also super helpful. But I'd say just one piece that I would add beyond that is for us, really, I think D2C in and of itself is important. But what's really sort of exciting about our D2C channel for us is, can it help us create a broader ecosystem, right? Can we use technology in a way which helps us create a broader sort of ecosystem? It could include things like advice, it could include content, it could include sort of brand building efforts, etc. Right? And I think when we think of that, to us, D2C really makes a lot of sense because it's really a way of creating a much, much more consumer-centric organization than, let's say, some of the other channels would really enable. So I think that's really how we're thinking of our sort of D2C business, where the investments we're making today are obviously a way of getting sort of sales, but I think the much more exciting play, which makes a lot more sense, is can this channel and the ecosystem that it enables around it, right? The hundreds of thousands of consumers you can reach out via emails, the folks who you can talk to as part of a community, the insights around product development, can that whole ecosystem in the long run build a much stronger brand? And I think for us in our category, Ayurveda, like I was talking through at the top of the conversation, I think it's a very high curiosity, high interest, high questions category. So again, I think D2C as a format really enables that conversation to happen in a much more rich way. Whereas, some of the marketplaces, some of, let's say, even offline shopping experience sometimes can feel a little bit transactional. Whereas D2C, since you're custom designing that whole experience, right, can enable that much richer conversation with the consumer. So we feel it also adds a ton of value to the consumer's life. So I think that's really how we're thinking about D2C and investing in D2C.
It's interesting. So what you're saying is it's not only about the content that you have on your website, but it's also about how the whole experience is, which includes higher touch like services and so on.
Yep.
That helps building up the brand.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, building the brand is what we are, where we are creating value. And I guess this is a very key component of doing that.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And Avnish,
so for us, we've looked at our business more intrinsically to understand the bigger challenge for us as a brand and as a company is trying to propagate trials, right? Our biggest challenge, and that's why D2C has kind of helped us a lot, is when you create new formats, when you create new alienating ways to take traditional supplements, is when the retail shelf just doesn't deliver. You might have a visual appeal, but you won't get the trial. You might have the first purchase, but you won't ever get the repeat. And that's where D2C really comes into play for us. We see that first trial coming in. We are able to communicate, retain, and deliver a much better experience to our consumers sustainably, right? Understanding concerns, which at the first stage, you'd never understand. You might try one of my products, but you didn't try it again, is because, and that bigger question mark is, how do I learn from you? Why didn't you buy again? What could I do better from you? Which in traditional retail just lacks, right? DTC allows me to engage with that audience sustainably, consistently, and find better ways to retain them, right? If one product hasn't worked, that doesn't mean the entire ecosystem doesn't work. We can go up and upsell and cross-sell. And that DTC funnel for me, from retention to reward, builds that engagement with that consumer and building a larger community, as Shrey said, right? A lot of times with nutrition is the first cue to adaptation is advice. Do I need it? When I need it? Why do I need it? And how do I build that ecosystem very considerably in saying, I can guide, I can advise, and I can educate my consumer on the fly as they need it, when they need it. WhatsApp enables this at 3 a.m. to like having an engagement channel, which is, we use bots now for Instagram. And how do I consistently engage with my consumer when they have basic generic questions of if this product's for me? And for innovative formats like us, I think the bigger challenge is try and get as many customers to try first. And so we do a lot of trials, which DTC enables me to do, which retail technically would never do. So it's great. It's a larger investment because obviously we're going out and dishing out a lot more samples, but it's also the top of the funnel. We're creating this awareness for product features, which I would never be able to do offline.
Okay. Quick one to all those who are watching this program. The Q&A box is active. I'm already seeing a few questions out there. And in about 15 minutes, we'll be taking up some of these questions. So do please write your questions in that box. Moving on to a somewhat different topic. Slurrp Farm and Wellbeing were both chosen in the Amazon Global Selling Program, Propel. I'm very curious. I mean, I'm great. Congratulations to you guys.
Thank
but
you.
Is that really a big opportunity? Do you guys really have a right to win in markets outside India?
I'll let Shauravi take it first.
Yes. Kannan, you eat a Cadbury chocolate, right? It's made in India, it's made in the UK, it's made in the US. You're eating Betty Crocker pancakes in India now, right? So this is the time when, as young Indian brands, we have to believe that the reverse can happen. And I think I've shared this with you before, but we would go to sort of all these food fairs, and India would always be like rice and spices. We would be a commodity-led export, and then we would be importing all the brands, right? And so many of our most loved childhood brands are brands that are imported into India. And I think it's a really exciting time because we can be brands that are exported, making high quality value add products, and dare to dream big, where you say, you know what, I want Slurrp Farm to be like that Cadbury's bar, and obviously not as unhealthy, but I'm using that as a metaphor of our childhood, right? Which is that you can make that product even in the US or any other country where you develop a market. So I think that and big hats off to Amazon, right, in some way, because they helped brands like us to navigate first India. It was not easy. And I've written about this a little bit, where I remember launching at the time when you needed a C form, and you needed a C form to go from Delhi to Noida or Delhi to Gurgaon. Now, as a first-time entrepreneur, that is challenging. And now we have reached the next stage of that, which is when you think in your head, it's the question you asked, like to go from Delhi to selling in the US, is that even possible? It's kind of like the next C form, right? Yes, it's possible. And they've opened the door to doing that. So, a big thank you there. And I definitely think that will be the gateway to brands taking the next step then. Can you make it to the shelves of all the retail listings? Can you make it your product there? And for us, it's a double dream, right? In some way, it's to take the brand global, and it's to take millets to the world. Like the world should be eating millets made in India, and that's also the exciting part. So we absolutely think it's possible, and we're very excited to do it.
And Avnish?
So look, to be honest, when we started this business in 2016, while we started with research at Johns Hopkins, and that's where really the brim of, where the seed sort of soured. And we realized that we were anyways leveraging technology, innovation, ingredients, all from the Western country. We were anyways adapting to that to try and bring it back to India. What's transformed in the last 4 years is you see India becoming this powerhouse with Ayurvedic export, right? Most of the consumer brands in the US today either use an ashwagandha or a curcumin or a turmeric. And you see this really crazy mind shift intuitively when consumers go on shelf and want to buy an Indian origin or an Indian inspired Ayurvedic product on the shelf. from companies like Bai to Pepsi to Coca-Cola, right? Everyone's got one of those elements in all of their product categories, which are inspired by India. And I think that narrative had to change at some point. If we're anyways leveraging technology from there, we're anyways sourcing ingredients from the best parts of the world, is this an opportunity to create this pride for made in India being showcased there? And do we have the right to win? I think certainly so, because I think we've constructed ourselves on a very core foundation of technology, which is global, right? It's not very centered on India. We're using ingredients which are a global fanfare, from algae to mushrooms to adaptogens, right? We're using ingredients that have this global acceptance. The only difference is that we're making in India because obviously costs are lower, economy of scale is a lot better here, and better sourcing patterns, right? I mean, our labors are a lot cheaper than the US. So do we have the right to win where technology ingredients can be showcased at the same platform at a much better price and value attached? Yes. The inhibition starts when you look at most Americans, Europeans, we've always been that downgraded supplement supplier, right? Until now, most urban markets have always imported. We'll buy a GNC, we'll buy an on protein, and we'll buy imported products because we feel a sense of security and safety. What I think now, this whole made in India, from Shrey to Shauravi, and we have this certain amount of trust that we believe that there's certain entrepreneurs that are going to do right, stand core to their ethos, and bring out the right product. And I think the Americans are now starting to realize that India also is that part of innovation, right? We've been languished and sidetracked that we're not innovators in nutrition, we're not innovators in pharmacology. And when you look at the vaccines now, India is shining bright. We're manufacturers. When you look at nutrition globally, we're sellers for Ayurveda all over the world, and teas. And Badam's a great example of that. And I think India's going to be a great representative in the US. And I think, yes, there is a chance for us to win as long as we showcase in the right format, the right product to the right consumer on that shelf. And we've been eagerly surprised of how most of the large big format retailers have looked at us. The first conscious appeal is, are you even Indian? And we put this very big stamp on every one of our products, which says proudly made in India. And that's the only stamp we refuse to let go of, because we want to take this pride back and saying, yes, we can deliver performance. Yes, we can deliver results, but we yet be proudly made in India. So while it might have the bit of inhibition and acceptance in the US at some point, but I think with the right investments and education, we can get there. So yes, I think we're well positioned to take on that challenge.
I think it's really wonderful to hear both of you talking about this, that we can create brands in India for the world. And then, of course, we have got platforms like Amazon. And as you rightly said, Shauravi, that's a great platform. And I think congratulations to them to have recognized the opportunity of made in India brands around the world. And I think for those watching in, I think this must be something truly interesting. And I want to turn to a sort of an adjacent question, which is, on the one hand, you have international. On the other hand, we have what used to be called Bharat, which is like India too, right? And that's been transforming because the reach of e-commerce, the reach of all the content providers has gone deep into India. It's no longer a large city phenomenon. What's the implication of that for firms like you? Is that just a natural extension of what you guys are doing? Or does it call for specific solutions which are different? Shrey, do you have any thoughts? Anyone else?
Sure. No, so I think actually this kind of convergence has been one of the most interesting things we've observed over the last few years. I think a couple of big reflections there. I think the first one is that with the rise of digital media as well as sort of digital distribution, a lot of aspirations and sensibilities have converged across say the metro cities or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, right? I think just digital media online has been a great equalizer for a lot of aspirations, tastes, sensibilities there, right? So someone sitting in a tier 4 city often will have the same sensibility that someone sitting in a large metro would have. And I think that's been a net positive for brands like us, because what that really enables is it enables us on day one to have a much larger consumer set, right? You're not just talking to a very small niche audience located in 10, 12 catchments across the big cities, but you can talk to someone everywhere from Dehradun, where my family is originally from, to Udhampur, where I grew up, to Bombay, where I now live, right? So that's super exciting. I think the second perspective which I have, though, which I think I see still as a bit of a divergence, is the affordability filter. So while I think a lot of aspirations have converged in the top, say, 5-10% of Indians by economic status, so the top 50, 100 million people, I think the truth is that affordability is still a concern beyond that, right? So as D2C brands, typically we end up being priced at the top end of the spectrum, and that makes sense on day zero, and probably for the first, say, few years of your journey. But I think once you leave that sort of top 100 million audience, whether that's someone below that in a large city like Bombay or in a tier 2, tier 3 city, I think then just economic realities dictate that for really making a long-term consumer of that person, you need to think a little bit differently. And I think that large brands, I think the HULs of the world have dealt with this in a bunch of different ways, which we were talking to that day. But I think once you hit a certain scale, it is probably, and you're kind of leaving that consumer, it is worth thinking very strategically about how you want to now grow further. Do you stay within that kind of top 10% of Indians? Do you branch out beyond that? What are the trade-offs? And I think that's definitely something worth thinking about. But I think those are probably our two big reflections over the last few years.
Anyone else?
I think I'll say that we have, I hope in the next decade, this sort of distinction between India or Bharat, which is a bit forced in my head, disappears. We have to stop thinking about the country like that. And I think that we have always designed to be able to work for anyone, anywhere. Like that Cadbury's bar metaphor, right? Like wherever you are. And therefore, then the question becomes income and price. So on day one, because of Amazon, right, we always saw almost 40% of our sales come from cities, which you may call tier 2, 3, but even sometimes 4 or 5, like I don't even know where they are, some of them. And I think that was always interesting to us, which is exactly what Shrey is saying, that there is a convergence of taste or preferences, and it doesn't only sit in a Bangalore, Bombay, Delhi. It goes beyond those 3 cities, or what you may call as tier 1, include other cities. So it's very exciting. I think there'll be 20 tier 1 cities soon, and we have to design for beyond that as well in the next decade. Someone said something really interesting to me, to your question, right? Where for us, really, the thing is, how do you design for the bottom of the pyramid as well? And he said something to me, which I think really stuck with me. He said that you are, by the fact that you're making this aspirational, you're making healthy aspirational, you are changing desires at the bottom of the pyramid, and that will come. So once you scale, you can address the bottom of the pyramid and make a product that is affordable and address that gap, the nutrition gap. But right now, it is carbonated fizzy drink and junk food, which is aspirational. And so by the action of what you are doing, you're going to reach out to all parts of the country. So keep at it and keep that message of aspiration really, get the right early adopters going, and then you will be able to address every level of the pyramid as you scale. Don't try and address the bottom of the pyramid today, because you will fail. And you will feel like you failed. So don't set yourself up for that goal even. Get that 100 million right, what Shrey is talking about.
Karan, actually, there's one other perspective. I'd love your opinion on this as well. Is when I kind of reflect, right, it feels like one of the reasons that a lot of younger D2C brands have done well and been able to compete with some of the large incumbents is because they've spoken very directly to that top 5-10% of Indians who had a certain extra willingness to pay, which wasn't necessarily being tapped into by some of the large incumbents, which in some ways were building for the middle, right? So as kind of insurgent brands, once you scale, right, what's your view on the trade-offs there, right? Because once you start building for the middle, in some ways you potentially also vacate some of the specificity for the really kind of top 5-10% of Indians. How do you see some of this playing out, just based on your experience with some of these really large brands as well? How have they thought about the trade-offs?
So, when I think of the big FMCG companies,
Yeah.
They don't seriously address the top of the pyramid because it's too small, but they address many different other pieces of the pyramid. And they do it in a couple of ways. I think first is through a suite of brands. So when I think of Hindustan Lever and let's say shampoo, and shampoo is a large business now in India. They have 5 or 6 brands today in the market, and each of them is positioned very differently, both in terms of the set of benefits that's rolled into that brand, and often in terms of price point, right? So they talk to different benefit bundles. There is a consumer who just says, I don't want to use soap for my hair, I just want to wash my hair. To a consumer who says that, look, that's just not enough for me. I want to see my hair all shiny and nice and all of that. To a consumer who says, I want a salon experience. So different people out there, and how do you segment the market and position brands? The second piece is what you said, which is about affordability. And therefore, when you look at the set of packs that they have a single-use sachet, and they can go up to a 1 liter pack, right? So I think these are the 2 levers which have been most commonly used to actually address different need groups or user segments in the market. And it's not only about Bharat or the less affluent. It's what's important for me in a category may be very different to another person who has got the same affordability as me. But may have, for me, a car is transportation. For somebody else, a car is about riding in the right brand. And therefore, there are all sorts of people, I guess, out there.
No, super interesting, because if I transport that back to our, say, trade-offs, right? I would think that given that our edge in some way comes from consumer understanding, the data, the ability to target them effectively, potentially the house of brands approach within the same consumer potentially makes sense, because once you go to a slightly different consumer, in some ways you potentially need to start from zero. But super interesting perspective. Thanks.
So I've got a bunch of questions which have come in, and I'm going to call it out. And if there is something addressed to one of you specifically, then of course it goes to you. But otherwise, whomsoever wants to pick it up can have a go at it. The first one I see is from Purav Shah. And the question is, what are the biggest challenges in growing a healthy foods brand? And how does a brand differentiate itself when there is an explosion in D2C healthy brands? So it's about differentiation, and how do what are the big issues in growing a healthy foods brand? Who wants to take that one?
I can address that. I think that, obviously the biggest challenge really is, Kannan, as you said earlier, taste, right? And that evolving people's taste. It's kind of like when, I don't know if people remember, even, I don't know the age of people on this call, but when the whole country moved from white bread to brown bread, and it's not even fully brown bread in some instances, right? But I remember that distinctly as a child being like a change. And my mother saying no more white bread, and all of us were pretty sad for about a month. But then I can't eat white bread anymore. So it is almost like you have to force that messaging, or that whole Sunday ke ande kind of campaign, right? I hated eggs, and somehow now I still eat them, and it has become a sort of a, in your head, it's a fixation saying, I don't eat a lot of meat, so maybe I should eat the egg white for my protein. So I think that there are paradigms of marketing that need to make that shift to health. So it's education, evangelism, it's a campaign, the government has to get involved. Like, it happens at multi-levels for a shift and a systemic shift to happen to health. It's not going to happen, because I would say we're in the state of eating a lot of junk food these days, and that paradigm shift is yet to occur. The second question was around building brands, right? And it is extremely challenging. I think it has never been easier to make product, right? And I definitely think that when we started making product was hard, but now making product has simplified. So therefore, actually, branding has become more challenging. And that's actually really fun, because like, for us, brand has been the heart of everything we have done from day one. And sometimes people used to be like, you spend so much time, effort, thought on this. Why do you do it? It doesn't matter. Bas label chipka do, bech do, that kind of sort of commentary we definitely got a lot. And I think that bringing that, Shrey alluded to it, and so did Avnish, content community and commerce together. And D2C allows you to do that. But the conflux of those three things is what builds brand. And so you have to choose, like, is it in the way you look? Is it in the way you speak? Is it in the way, your customer really understands what you really stand for? I actually think that it's hard, but that's what makes it fun. It's not fun if it's not a bit of a challenge, right? So you just have to figure what is it that really is my core DNA. I think that's important for any brand and in any sphere or field.
Cool, thanks. The second one, actually, I'm going to twist this around from Smita Devigere. How do you see the global opportunity in B2B clean label plant proteins to replace animal products? I'm going to twist it around and say, how do you see the Indian opportunity for this?
Sorry, can you repeat that question, Karan?
How do you see the global opportunity in clean label plant proteins to replace animal products?
So, one systemic shift that Shauravi was talking about has happened in this conscious awareness of us protecting the environment. In some conscious way, each one of us is wanting to or desiring to contribute, right? It might not be as an adverse effect of what I do on a daily basis, but it's a conscious mindset that I adapt every day, saying, I'll try to use less plastic, I'll try to eat clean, I'll go plant-based, I'll reduce my use of any kind of animal protein, I'll try and minimize lactose or dairy or whatever it may be. And I think this major mind shift has happened with all of these really interesting movies that have come up on Netflix, Game Changers, and all of these really interesting concepts where they say that systemically, when you start going completely natural and plant-based is when you can really see the difference in your body, right? There's enough scientific studies. And I think what's India adapting to is we're 75% vegetarian audience. And for the longest time, we've been relying on dairy. We've been relying on this entire industry that is feeding us with let's just say, not the right kind of nutrition, right? What we tended to believe that most of your calcium would come from milk. And that's completely transformed in the mindset that, your milk really doesn't have that much calcium. It's almost equivalent to a glass of coconut water. And I think that mind shift has really changed the way how Indians look at plant protein as well. Over the last, I'd say, 2.5 years, while I've been dealing in the import and distribution of, let's just say, whey protein in this country, I've seen nearly 25% market share being eroded to plant protein in just India alone over the last 2.5 years. And we've seen this because consumers have attributed better health benefits. They've attributed just a cleaner lifestyle. They've attributed better digestion. And I think this larger fanfare of moving dairy-free and moving lactose-free has created this adulation for sort of plant-based protein. And I think that's here to stay. I think India is always going to be at that form of governance where we take nutrition in our own hands because our families are so nuclear that we're guided, advised by every one of us. And if one of my friends is taking it, then I'm suddenly more reliant because the community is building around taking cleaner protein and cleaner nutrition. And I think that mind shift is beautiful that you see in this country. And I'm the most proud of it. I really see and love how, I go to a protein store and almost 6 out of 10 people in that store, the first question they ask is, plant protein hai kya? And it's just so intuitively realization that consumers have a desire. Maybe the taste, maybe the form, maybe the structure isn't up there in global standards, but I think that's shifting. India is moving.
Super. Here's a bit of a challenge for the three of you from Mark's side. And he asks, all of these three brands have just under 100,000 followers on Instagram. So how does it justify to stay on top if they choose D2C channel as a prime source in reaching their customers? I mean, are you guys serious about D2C when you just have very few, just 100,000 followers on Instagram?
I can take that one.
Yeah.
So I actually agree, by the way. I think we were a little bit, I would say, we only really seriously focused on social media in the last 6 months or so, maybe even sooner. And I'd say somewhere, it's a crude proxy, but I'd say social media engagement, I think the numbers, one element of it, but I think just the number of followers, but more importantly, engagement as well, is a super interesting proxy for just how widely you're talked about online. And I'd say for Kapiva personally, I think the next 6 months will be quite different. And it's definitely something I'm making a big push on. But I'd say broadly pretty fair question.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, no, spot on. I mean, I would say that to the person who asked this question, like our year-end OKR is to hit that 100K. So I hope Avni on our team is listening. I love the question. I think that D2C, however, or digital takes so many different tentacles, right? Like WhatsApp. So many people who message us, and the amount of WhatsApp is exploding for us. I don't know if these mums or even follow us on Instagram, um, and YouTube and Facebook. So definitely, I think that we need to have 100K on all the platforms, not just Instagram, and more, right? Like to grow that number really is where your sort of brand becomes the norm. Having said that, there are some mega blockbuster brands in India that don't have the 100K followers. So I'm always curious, where does it, do you follow the brands you love and buy? It's a question. Open
I was
question.
actually going to top up to that, Shauravi. When was the last time you followed a Dove or when you followed Cadbury? And how often do we really go out and follow brands that we consume daily? Is it Colgate that you follow on Instagram? Not really, but you use one every day, right? How often would you do that? And so I think the question, while being extremely honest, it's a mission for all of us to kind of grow that. We kind of ask ourselves is that audience fragmented? Is he coming to me on Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and YouTube and Twitter? Or is he all concentrated into one platform and that's my sole purpose and sole goal? So, I guess for all of us, yes, that's the core mission of us scaling that audience. But I think where consumption and patterns happen are very different from what is kind of projected in terms of number of followers for Instagram. It's probably not the right matrix where we look at popularity or consumption, but it's a fair matrix to look at.
Cool. I have these two questions which are sort of similar, so I'm going to combine the two of them. So Raju Nair asks, the challenge is to scale and grow the size of the pie via driving penetration, thus continue to stay in business and be profitable. So how do you go about doing this? And Mario Raj asks, D2C enables us to get more in sync with our customer needs, but how do we grow beyond the typical smartphone user and reach a wider base through D2C? So in some ways, people are asking, how do you increase penetration and go beyond the existing sort of demand base?
I'll give you a few of the fragments that we've been doing over the last few months. We work, like in the US, there are platforms called WebMD, which is an education platform that teaches you about all the nutrition that you take. In India, we've got a very similar platform called MyUchar. And it's been a very intrinsic learning for us where we've now gone very regional in terms of content and context, right? We're creating relevance with cause and effect. So if you're facing gut issues and gut challenges, can I contextually find relevance in what the problem is, identify whether it's a probiotic, a prebiotic, or some kind of digestive enzyme that your body needs, doing that with content. And I think regionalization of a lot of this is going to help brands like us penetrate those markets. We realized by making just vernacular ads has given us a lot more appreciation for what we do. We never realized that there could be an audience sitting in tier 2, tier 3 that would listen or learn about skin in a format where most of the ingredients we use are extremely alienating for half of my team. When we use collagen and glutathione and hyaluronic acid, it's alienating. But we realized this tier 2 and tier 3 when we put it in Hindi, and suddenly there's a gravitational pull where consumers understand that. So, that's my take that, I think consumerism is going to happen in that tier 2, tier 3 when you start regionalizing a lot of the content and context. Making things relevant to them the way they understand it is going to make that mind shift. It's just a process of time. And will we be profitable in that endeavor? It's time to tell. It's a lot of investment to make with little appreciation and adulation today, but it's a continuous feat that we have to make, for the long tail.
There's a question about sort of choice of channels coming from Subin Ahmed. And he asked, do you recommend to do a launch of a food brand today in the offline space first or on online platforms and then move to an offline kind of channel mix? So what's your view? What's a way to think about channel choice at the time of entry versus later?
I can take this one. So I would say, firstly, I'd say it also depends on the nature of the food product, because I think food is also on a spectrum, right? Whether you look at, let's say, I think AOV can be one way to look at it. Just the intrinsic nature of the food product, just things like expiry periods, etc., can be another way to look at it. So I think when you look at the nature of the food product, then you try and map that with where the consumer is and what would be easiest to kind of induce trials. I think that will inform the decision. So, for example, if I were launching a super fresh foods based kind of 7-day, 14-day expiry food product, I think offline is still the only way to go, right? So there are several great brands like ID Foods, etc., which operate with very big constraints there. So I'd say if you're trying to build a brand like that, offline is probably still the place to start, and then within that you go to a certain subset of offline, which could be a large format stores, etc. I think if you're doing something more in the kind of nutraceutical space, where in some ways you have slightly longer shelf lives, and also more importantly, in some ways the consumer journey is around, you need lots of content, you need lots of information, lots of hand holding to make that purchase step, right? I think then in that case, I would say online is probably the way to go. So interesting, because when we started with Kapiva, I think we were offline first in our GTM back in 2018. But if we were sort of doing it all over again, I'd recommend, given our product mix, I'd probably recommend starting with some of the online channels.
Interesting. So I just have time for one last question. And this is about food trends. And for all the entrepreneurs out there who are probably trying to think about what is the next disruption that we're going to see, what do you guys think? What's the next big thing in the food and beverage industry in India? What do you think is going to be hot?
In my opinion, I think the whole probiotic and prebiotic is going to be the next big thing. I think gut science, gut health in this country is raging havoc in most of our systems. So I think that is something where you're going to see a lot of infusions with probiotics and prebiotics, a lot of gut infused products. So that's something that I personally see a big trend over the next 15 to 18 months for sure.
15 to 18 months. All right.
We've known of a lot of, from the HUs and PNGs, everyone's looking at gut very seriously. There are ingredients which everyone's trying to explore and innovate with, from using them in your cornflakes to using them in nut butters to using them in chocolates now. And we see a lot of these trends coming in.
What do other people feel about it?
I think I'd agree. And I think we talked about this a little, right? In terms of, for me, the surprise trend was actually going vegan and people adopting plant protein, vegetarianism as a lifestyle. And in India, that's an interesting space to be, right? But I think it's related to what Avnish is saying and to prebiotics, probiotics, in that there is greater attention to gut health. And I think that epigenetics, which is how basically the science of how your DNA and genes, right, are affected by what you eat and the intersection of that, and linking brain, gut to your life and life outcomes, we'll see many tentacles, be it prebiotics, probiotics, be it veganism, be it anti-inflammatory foods or immunity building foods. These are all things that come out of a meta trend. And then out of that, we'll be almost changing the way we eat historically a little bit. And it's quite curious to see where we land in that framework. And so the surprise I have seen is the global sort of adoption of going more towards plant protein and vegan protein sort of options in what people are eating.
Interesting. Shrey, your thoughts?
I'd say Ayurveda and food is a big trend. I think we see that playing out for sure.
It's already
just if I can make a shameless plug, but no, I think for me the big one really is, I think, vegetarian, vegan. I think that's somehow, I think there'll be a lot of brands that come up around enabling Indian people to live healthier, better lives with those kind of preferences. I think completely believe that. Yeah.
Great. On that note, that's all really had time for today. Thanks everybody for watching this program. And thank you so much, Shrey, Avnish and Shauravi, for sharing your views. Very insightful, wonderful to hear the kind of views that all of you have shared with us today. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.